Today, we're at Werner Boyce Salt Springs State Park, which occupies about 4,000 acres along the Gulf Coast in Pasco County. The past year has seen a lot of changes at this park, including the opening of some nice hiking trails that let you explore many of the features of this coastal habitat. On our hike today, we'll follow the Springs Trail, one of the most interesting and scenic trails in the state. But don't take my word for it. Come on along with me for a quick video tour. To get to the trailhead, enter Werner Boyce Salt Springs State Park at the main entrance off US 19 just north of Ridge Road. Park in the first public parking area and look for the start of the trail at the northeast corner of the parking lot. To give you an idea of the path we'll be following, here's a map showing the Springs Trail. Beginning at the trailhead near the parking area, it winds along Cauldron Spring Run, then along Salt Spring Run all the way to the spring. Returning, we will take an alternate route that leads us past Reflection Spring. Altogether, this trail will take us past 5 springs, each unique in its own way. The springs here at Werner Boyce have little, if any, flow and tend to be tidal in nature. And we're doing this hike just before a full low tide so that you can see some of the unique features of the different springs. The first spring we will visit is Toilet Bowl Spring, and yes, there's one of those little free libraries here in the picnic area near the spring. This spring was originally called Brett's Toilet Bowl, after cave diver Brett Hemphill, who was the first one to explore it. As we approach the actual spring, you can hear the rush of water flowing into the spring pool. The source of this flow is a small stream that goes underground before re-emerging at this point. Look closely at the surface of the water, and you can see a distinct spin that gives this spring its rather unappealing name. Now, if you'll walk over here with me to the other side of the trail, we'll take a look at another spring. This one is Cauldron Spring. We haven't hardly even left the parking lot yet, and there's just so much to see here. Don't let that rush of water coming through the culvert fool you. That's just rainwater runoff from lands east of US 19 and has nothing to do with the spring. The actual spring vent is an opening beneath the water just to the right of where the culvert comes out. Now we're going to start our hike by heading north on the spring trail. Up ahead a short distance, there's a fork, and we'll head west and follow the north bank of Cauldron Spring Run. Looking back at the spring from the trail gives us a different perspective. As we continue along the spring run, there are plenty of opportunities to stop and enjoy the scenery. A lot of people walk this trail to see the birds, which are ever present here in the park. Many rare and endangered species, such as the wood stork and roseate spoonbill, make this area their home. You'll find a number of birding platforms along the trails at places that offer good views. Now we've reached the point where Cauldron Run joins with Salt Springs Run. Since it's near low tide, you can see an oyster bar at the conjunction of these two streams. But at high tide, that is completely covered by water. At the beginning of our tour, I mentioned that we were here just before a low tide. This causes the muddy banks and oyster bars along the streams to be exposed. I chose this time because it is the best time to observe some of the springs, and it's also a good time to view waterfowl and wading birds that feed in the shallow areas. But if you're only interested in looking at the scenery, most people prefer visiting during a medium to high tide. This overhead shot gives us a good view of the confluence of Salt Spring Run and Cauldron Spring Run. There's the big oyster bar, and there's the boardwalk we just crossed a few minutes ago. In addition to bird watching, fishing is another popular activity at Werner Boyce Salt Springs State Park. The Springs Trail has a number of places that are ideal for shoreline fishing along Cauldron Spring Run and Salt Springs Run. This point, named Fisher's Corner, is one of those places. Picnic table kiosks are also placed here and there for those who just want to get out into nature to relax and enjoy themselves. As we continue north on the trail along the bank of Salt Spring Run, we come to a side trail veering off to the left. This trail is named Red Spring Trail and will take us to another spring. Red Spring is not very impressive, but it is a good example of a tidal spring that provides an underground connection through the limestone karst in this area. At high tide, this spring will be filled completely with water. But at low tide, we can see the deep red colored mud that gives this spring its name. It's difficult to see from this point, but there are additional vents further to the west hidden by the foliage. Red Spring Trail leads to a maze of single-track paths that wind their way up to a point overlooking a large tidal lake. While not officially part of the Springs Trail, this makes for a quick side trip you might find interesting. In fact, as I look out over the water, I can see a couple of ducks and a great white egret in the distance. In this overhead shot, you can see the lake a little better as our drone heads upstream along Salt Springs Run. The place on the bank we were viewing from a few seconds ago is at the point right over there on the left. While you're hiking, be sure to notice some of the interesting things you pass, like this colorful mushroom. After exiting Red Spring Trail, we're back on the Spring Trail, finally heading toward Salt Spring. We come to another branch in the trail, with one leg heading off to a loop named the Fireline Trail. Keep to the left and follow the signs to Salt Spring. Here's a tree that's been standing watch for a long time. At this point, the trail crosses an expansive open area bordered by needle rush on the left. This lowland section may be a bit flooded during an extra high tide. We're finally coming to the salt spring area near the end of the trail. The spring is directly below in this aerial view, and that lake in the distance is the one we were just viewing from the end of the Red Spring Trail. As we walk up to the spring, let me tell you a little about its history. Salt Spring and the area around it is thought to be the site of a salt works during the Civil War. Seawater was heated in large kettles until it evaporated to produce salt for the Confederate troops. The spring itself is one of the deepest in the state, extending through a number of chambers to a depth of at least 320 feet below the ground. Although scuba diving is not permitted at the spring, several exploratory dives have been conducted into the cave with permission of the State Park Service. Salt Spring is considered one of the most dangerous cave diving locations, and portions remain undiscovered. We're looking here at the spring pool. To our left is the spring run, which flows into Salt Springs Run, and to our right is a tidal lake. The opening into the spring cave network is just to the right of where we are standing. This aerial view from our drone shows the tidal lake upstream from Salt Spring. Watch out! I told you there were lots of birds here. The orange buoy in the water is a marker for a kayak trail, but you can only get back to this lake at high tide. Needless to say, kayaking and canoeing is popular here at Werner Boyce Salt Spring State Park. Bring your own or rent one from the concession near the parking lot. Straight in front of us is the opening from the lake into the spring pool. One of the unique features of Salt Spring is that downstream from the spring pool are two limestone arches that span the spring run. We're walking right up to the bank next to the first of these arches, which you can see clearly at this tide level. At an extremely low tide, this arch will be completely out of water, and all of the current will be flowing beneath it. A little further along the bank, we come to the second limestone arch. At tide changes, the current flows over this arch so strongly it is referred to as the tidal waterfall. Here you can see a boil of water as it rises to the surface after coming through under the arch. We've reached the end of the Springs Trail, and it's time to start heading back. Instead of retracing our steps the entire way, we'll take a more direct route that passes by one more spring. Reflection Spring was just discovered in the last year. Like the other springs in the area, it is tidal, with very little, if any, flow. Its still surface and scenic surroundings make it a good place to sit and relax near the end of this hike. After a quick rest, we're back on the trail again for a short walk back to the parking area. Werner Boyce Salt Springs State Park is a real treasure for Pasco County and for Florida. If you've not visited here in the last year or so, you owe it to yourself to come and see the changes that have been taking place. You won't be disappointed.